Hi guys, welcome back to MFAC. In the previous session, we ended up on saying about the gyri and sulci around the cerebral hemisphere. So today, let's go on through all the gyri and sulci around the cerebral hemisphere. Come on. Sulci and gyri on the supralateral surface. This is the supralateral surface of the cerebral cortex, and one of the important sulcus we have described is central sulcus. The central sulcus divides the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, and the lateral sulcus is the sulcus that divides the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. The lateral sulcus begins on the inferior surface. As it reaches the lateral surface, it divides into three rami. The largest of these is the posterior ramus. The posterior end of this ramus turns upwards into the temporal lobe. The other rami of the lateral sulcus are the anterior ascending rami, anterior horizontal rami. They extend into the lower part of the frontal lobe, as we see. The frontal lobe was further divided by the precentral sulcus. This is the precentral sulcus. The gyri present between the precentral sulcus and the central sulcus is the precentral gyri that you see over here. The area in front of the precentral sulcus is divided into superior, middle and inferior frontal gyri by the superior frontal sulcus and the inferior frontal sulcus. The inferior frontal gyri is subdivided into pars orbitalis, pars triangularis and pars opercularis by the anterior horizontal and anterior ascending rami of the lateral sulcus. So this is a sulcus seen in the frontal lobe. Coming to the parietal lobe, we have the post-central sulcus. Post-central sulcus runs parallel to a central sulcus but behind it, and the gyri present between the post-central sulcus and the central sulcus is the post-central gyri. The area behind the post-central sulcus is divided into superior and inferior parietal lobules by the intraparietal sulcus. The intraparietal sulcus divides into superior and inferior parietal lobules. The inferior parietal lobule is being divided into three parts: anterior, middle and posterior parts. Anterior part is called the supramarginal gyrus and middle part is called the angular gyrus. And the posterior part, it's the upturned end of the inferior temporal sulcus. But the problem is that this brain is a little bit disfigured. That is, the inferior parietal lobule is being divided into three parts by the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus, superior temporal sulci, and the inferior temporal sulci. And the supramarginal gyrus is the upturned end of the lateral sulcus, while the angular gyrus is the upturned end of the superior temporal sulci. And the upturned end of the interior temporal sulci is the posterior part of the inferior parietal lobule. Coming to the temporal lobe, it is being further divided into superior temporal sulci and the inferior temporal sulci into the superior, middle and inferior temporal gyri. Coming to the occipital lobe, for the understanding of occipital lobe, let me take another image. The occipital lobe is further divided by the lateral occipital sulcus. The lateral occipital sulcus divides this lobe into the superior and inferior occipital gyri. And these gyri are being separated from the occipital pole by a sulcus called as the lunate sulcus. And this sulcus is the parieto-occipital sulcus that divides the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. And the area around the parieto-occipital sulcus or the parieto-occipital fissure is called as arcus parieto-occipitalis. It is separated from the superior occipital gyrus by the transverse occipital sulcus. So once again, the lateral occipital sulcus divides the occipital lobe into inferior and superior occipital gyri. Both of these gyri, the inferior and superior gyri, is being separated from the occipital pole by the lunate sulcus, and this is the parieto-occipital fissure or the parieto-occipital sulcus that divides the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. And the area around the parieto-occipital sulcus is called as arcus parieto-occipitalis. And the arcus parieto-occipitalis, this area is being divided from the superior occipital gyri by the transverse occipital sulcus. This is the parieto-occipital fissure, parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the arcus parieto-occipitalis and the transverse occipital sulcus. But here, something is good wrong. And this is the CALCARINE sulcus. CALCARINE sulcus begins near the occipital pole and runs forward to a point below the splenium of the corpus callosum, where it is being joined at an acute angle by the medial part of the parieto-occipital sulcus. Now let's come to the sulci and gyri on the medial surface. Coming to the medial surface, we have got the cingulate sulcus. The cingulate sulcus forms cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus lies between the cingulate sulcus and the corpus callosum. The posterior end of the cingulate gyri is being bounded by the suprasplenal sulcus. This is the upper middle part of the central sulcus. The U-shaped gyrus around the end of the central sulcus is called as paracentral lobule. The area between the cingulate gyrus and the supromedial border in front of the paracentral lobule is called as the medial frontal gyrus. The quadrangular area between the suprasplenal sulcus and the supromedial border is called as precuneus. And we know that this is the calcarine sulcus and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus. The triangular area between the parieto-occipital sulcus and the calcarine sulcus is called as cuneus. And over here we can see a narrow strip between the splenium and the stem of the calcarine sulcus, and this portion is called as isthmus. The paraterminal gyrus lays just in front of the lamina terminalis. So now let's look into the sulci and gyri on the orbital surface. This is the orbital surface. So here we can see a sulcus parallel to the medial orbital border. This is the olfactory sulcus. And between these two is the gyrus rectus. The rest of the orbital surface is divided by an H-shaped sulcus. And the H-shaped sulcus divides this into anterior orbital gyri, posterior orbital gyri, medial orbital gyri, and the lateral orbital gyri. The stem of the lateral sulcus lies deep between the temporal pole and the orbital surface. So now let's come into the sulci and gyri on the tentorial surface. Here, mainly we have got two sulcus. The medial sulcus called as the collateral sulcus and the lateral one is the occipitotemporal sulcus. And on the medial side of the temporal pole we have got the rhinal sulcus. The part medial to the rhinal sulcus is called as uncus. The part medial to the collateral sulcus is called as the parahippocampal gyrus, and its posterior part is limited medially by the calcarine sulcus. And we can see over here the hippocampal gyrus joins with the cingulate gyrus through the isthmus. The part lateral to the collateral sulcus is divided into medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyri by the occipitotemporal sulcus. So this is the medial occipitotemporal gyri and this is the lateral occipitotemporal gyri. The part medial and above the parahippocampal gyrus contains dentate gyrus, which is continuous in front with the uncus.